was a kid, I was obsessed with dinosaurs. So when my mom started dating a paleontologist, I thought he was the coolest guy in the world. I'd always read stories of kids hating their stepdad, but not Steve. He was down to earth, took me out for ice cream when I did well on my tests, and, most important to me, he loved dinosaurs. Thinking of him being my dad always put a smile on my face. It was the summer break before starting my 6th grade year. I was nervous about moving to the middle school. I didn't exactly have many friends in elementary school, so the thought of going to a school even larger, full of even more kids I didn't know, really wasn't something I was looking forward to. However, Steve knew just how to cheer me up. See, he had just been told of a new fossil being dug up around a remote lake in Colorado, and knowing how I loved this stuff, he invited me to come to the dig with him to experience a real fossil hunt. The mountain air was cool but heavy. My excitement to find fossils was at a constant battle with uphill hikes where I found myself stopping to catch my breath. This, combined with what it was actually like to be an 11-year-old helping out the fossil site, put a dose of reality into my young life. I guess when I pictured myself helping out with digging for fossils, I didn't expect to find myself carrying tools for everyone else. I wanted to be part of the digging team, but Steve said it was too dangerous, as the fossils had been found on a mountain cliff face high up above the small mountain lake below. When no one needed my help, I would head out and explore on my own. With the site being up in the mountains, there was little to no cell reception, so the only phone games I could play were Sudoku and crosswords, which got old real quick. The lake itself was pretty scenic. It had boulders sticking up out of the water on one end of the rocky lake, with a small stream leading into the other side. What was shocking to me most of all was the no fishing and no swimming signs posted around the lake. It seemed a shame to restrict so much at such a beautiful lake, but to be honest, if it wasn't for the no fishing signs posted, the lake itself would give off a feeling that there weren't any fish at all. The lake stood perfectly still, as it probably had forever, I could imagine. The only movement you ever saw was when a gust of wind caused ripples in the water, creating a shimmer of green and yellow, but only for an instant. The calm of the lake was of course interrupted, however, by the small chips of stone falling to the water below from the paleontologist up on the cliff face. A few days had gone by before the first new fossil had been chiseled away and removed from the cliff face. They had plenty of ammonites and even some trilobites, but with images of a Tyrannosaurus rex or a Triceratops pictured in my mind, I was quite surprised and, I'll admit, a little disappointed to see a 3-foot-long fish fossilized in the rock. It was a predator, Steve said. Look at the teeth, razor sharp, each nearly an inch long. Pretty cool, huh? First of its kind ever discovered. I gave him a smile, but he saw the disappointment in my eyes. Hey, I'm sorry, buddy. When you're older, I'll take you to a better dig site. Then you can really dig into the fun, eh? Dig in? Steve nudged me with his elbow and smiled. I knew he was trying to cheer me up. I just wished there was some way I could show him I was ready now. I woke up from my sleeping bag the following morning to a beautiful mountain sunrise, and to my surprise, a young bull moose drinking from the lake just opposite of our campsite. It looked up at me, realizing that I had taken notice, but not feeling threatened, took a few steps forward into the lake, lowering its head back down to drink from the lake once again. I turned away from the moose and nudged Steve awake. Huh? What, buddy? What's going on? He asked. Steve, I whispered. Look out at the lake, it's a moose. But as I twisted around the point, the moose was gone. Steve sat up in his sleeping bag. Ah, too bad, buddy. I'll catch a peek at him next time. Looks like he just ran off. The water was disturbed, rippling with green, yellow, orange, and red as the waves reflected the light of the sunrise where the moose had just stood. But he was right there. I looked away for a second. How could he have... Hey, moose are big animals, buddy. A couple steps and you would have made it into the trees. Steve smiled and nodded off in his sleeping bag. Deep down I considered that Steve was probably right, but now more than ever, the shimmer of green and yellow piqued my curiosity. Throughout the day, it was back to the usual grind, carrying tools back and forth to Steve and the other paleontologists like a pack mule, to their scaffolding work area on the cliff face. I did have some time to sketch out a few drawings of the lake and chipmunks I saw running by, but one thing was clear to me at that point. If I wanted the opportunity to dig for fossils, I was going to have to show Steve that I could do it. I laid in my sleeping bag that night, knowing just what I was going to do. I waited until the fires had died out, Steve and the other paleontologists were asleep. Then I snuck out of the tent, Using only the light from the moon, I nabbed a headlamp and a utility belt, equipping it with a few small tools, a rock pick hammer, a small pry bar, and a toothbrush, just like I had seen Steve use before, and started the hike to the cliff face scaffolding. I knew that if I could surprise Steve in the morning with an ammonite or a trilobite, he would trust me enough to let me dig with him for the rest of the trip. Hiking near the top of the cliff face, I eased myself down onto the ramp leading to the scaffolding. With my headlamp on, all I could see was the wooden boards of the ramp and darkness below, and as I switched it off and saw the lake lit up by the moonlight nearly 25 yards down from the scaffolding, I decided it was best to keep the light on. I walked down the scaffolding along the edge of the cliff face looking for my prize, and then I saw it. From the rock I could see the ribbed shell of an ammonite. I took my toothbrush out of my pocket and confirmed it with a few brushstrokes to clean up the area. From there, I took out my rock pick and took a few short strikes to the rock around the fossil, making sure not to damage it as small chips from the rock fell to the lake far below. Once a small crack around the fossil appeared, I took my pry bar and stuck it into the crack, pulling against the rock just like I had seen the other paleontologists do before me. With a little force, the fossil popped right out, a little more than I imagined, but luckily, it landed just on the edge of the wood scaffolding boards. Not wanting to fall, I got down on my hands and knees, moving closer to it, as a strong breeze shook the scaffolding. The fossil started shaking closer and closer to the edge, until it fell. With a quick reaction, I stuck out my hand into the darkness of my falling prize, and to my surprise, gripped rock. The breeze came to a stop as I stood up, wiping my forehead. I took my rock pick and gave the rock around the fossil a few good taps until I heard a crack, lifting this rock lid to reveal perfectly preserved ammonite. Steve is going to be so proud, I thought to myself as I swung the pick into the cliff face and tossed the remaining rock into the lake below. As I put the ammonite in my pocket, I heard a loud popping noise as I looked over the edge of the scaffolding. It was a 25-yard drop after all, but the sound of the rock hitting the water still surprised me. I turned towards my rock pick, but to my horror, it was barely hanging by the tip by a giant crack in the cliff face. I could hear another popping sound above my head on the cliff face, and I knew it was time to leave. I grabbed my rock pick and turned back towards the ramp, but it was too late. A giant piece of granite fell from up above, cracking the wooden scaffolding board in front of me. I looked on in horror. There was no way I was going to be able to make this 8-foot jump to the other side. But as more rocks started falling down onto the scaffolding, I knew there was only one thing I could do. I took a few steps back, then ran forward as fast as I could, reaching out at the scaffolding in front of me. In moments like these, you always hear about time slowing down, but it was nothing of the sort. I felt my fingers brush the rough edge of the wooden board, then hit hard onto the metal bars supporting the scaffolding, bouncing off as the view of the boards of the scaffolding vanished above me into darkness. I was falling. I couldn't help but stare at the night sky as tears filled my eyes and my stomach felt sick. I thought to myself, I could die, all for something so stupid. I rolled in the air towards where I was falling as my headlamp caught the surface of the water for just a moment before I smacked it shoulder first. The icy cold mountain water sent a shiver up my body, which oddly cut out the pain specifically in my arm and shoulder, which I could not feel besides the feeling of being sliced with paper cuts all over my body. Muscles tight from the icy cold, I kicked with all my might towards where I could see the moon and cried out when I reached the surface. "Help!" I yelled as I saw lights waving around in the direction of our tents. I tried kicking more when my left leg cramped up, which made the pain even more agonizing. I started to sink back into the lake, pulled down by the weight of my utility belt as I struggled to unclasp it with only one usable hand. It was at this moment that I could see my headlamp, still lit at the bottom of the lake, as the silhouette of what looked like a fish darted past it. I kept working at the belt, trying to undo it as I struggled to reach the surface again for another gulp of air, but the more I struggled, the more I realized I couldn't do it. I had one working leg, one working arm, and an ice-cold lake at night. I stopped struggling at that point, as I felt like I needed to acknowledge my fate. But as I looked down, I could see, lit up by the moonlight, skulls, bones, antlers from moose and horns from mountain goats and sheep littered the lake floor. I looked up more towards the surface, where the familiar shimmer of green and yellow caught my eye once more as a solitary fish moved ever closer. Through the rays of moonlight and the disturbed lake surface, I could make out the body shape and sharp teeth of the same fossilized fish we removed from the cliff face just a day before. From the darkness behind it, more of the same fish followed in frenzy, looking to make a meal out of me. I could see the mouth of the fish open as it neared me, revealing its razor-sharp weaponry like scalpels glistening in the moonlight. I closed my eyes and felt a wave of water and pain as I was gripped by my broken arm, screaming out in terror to the deafness of the lake until I was raised above the lake surface. "Don't worry, buddy, I gotcha!" It was Steve. I'd never felt such a wave of relief in my entire life, as my eyes cried in a combination of pain, terror, and happiness. He swam, pulling me through the water, near the cliff face as the other paleontologist ran towards the bank of the lake. I broke a smile, gazing up towards the moon above, just as we heard another sharp pop and a creak from up above us. Pipes and boards from the scaffolding above slapped and plunged into the surface as we were pulled back into the depths of the lake. Feeling both of my legs again, I kicked towards the surface, screaming Steve's name, but with no luck. I held my breath and looked down beneath the surface again, where I could just make out what looked like the silhouette of Steve, hunched over, drifting unconscious in front of my headlamp. I started kicking towards him with all my might, but that's when it happened. The shimmer of green and yellow in the moonlight, as fish after fish plunged their teeth into Steve's body, jerking him this way and that, ripping flesh and bone, creating a cloud of blood as he faded from view. I reached out for him with my good arm and screamed his name once more as I felt the tug on the back of my shirt from the other paleontologist, pulling me from the lake as a shock of freezing temperature knocked me unconscious. As I came to, I could hear the paleontologists. They said it was a horrible accident, even when I explained what I was doing up there to begin with, and chalked up my story about the fish to being rattled by the experience. Seeing an accident like that happen in front of you has a way of twisting your memory, they said, saying it was a fantasy I built based on the new fossil they found. It's been a few months since the night at that lake. My arm's healing up, and to tell you the truth, after telling my story in these journal entries, I think I've finally come to terms with the fantasy of the prehistoric fish. My mom told me that someone out there did believe me, and poisoned the lake and stocked it with trout for fishing. She even expressed how it would be good for me to take a trip with her there to do some swimming and fishing on the grand reopening. And I have to admit, being back here in the warm sun and the cool mountain air does feel nice. And the lake is as beautiful as I remember. The sunlight over the mountain tops has a way of creating this yellow and green shimmer in the waves. It's just beautiful. But enough writing for today. They're just about to let people start swimming. Type again soon.